Our brains do funny things when we see a new car for the first time, don't they? Well, at least mine does, and it's completely beyond our control. They decide within about 3 seconds whether we like it or not. Is it love at first sight? Do we crave to actually own one? When I first saw the new Defender and more recently the new Lotus Emira, it was an immediate thumbs up, and I'm getting similar chemical reactions with the MC20. It just looks right. And that's half the battle won for a supercar, isn't it? To make you and I desire it, because let's be real, an MC20 is a heart, not a head purchase. Part of that has to be the lingering appeal of the Maserati badge. Not as flashy as a Ferrari, but full of the same exotic Italian DNA. And despite recent forays into distinctly average diesel SUVs and saloons, it retains a mystique. After all, this is the brand that gave us the Bora, the Camzin, and the MC12. And don't forget Fangio winning the 1957 F1 title in the gorgeous 250F. That kind of heritage sticks. Okay, so I've had a moment to think about this now, and I shall now attempt to explain quite why I think the MC20 is such a good-looking car. Now, when this thing was first revealed, there were some complaints from the internet saying it was a little bit plain to look at, but I think that's rubbish, because a mid-engine layout is just inherently dramatic to look at, and this car has fantastic proportions, which is always the best place to start. And there's some lovely details too. I like the vertical lights, the pouty grille at the front. I like the fact that the sides of the car are so clean until you arrive at this massive intake up here on the shoulders, and the Trident logo punched into this plexiglass engine cover is a work of genius. It really is a really good looking supercar, this thing. I wonder if we can say the same about the interior. Oh, big tick for the doors. Okay, so getting in is easy enough. The seating position is absolutely spot on. The view out, when you're looking forwards at least, is fantastic. And here's a surprise. These seats, they're really well stuffed, super squidgy, little bit of bolstering on the sides, but properly comfy. Can't complain about those. The overall impression is it's a really simple layout in here. You've got a digital instrument cluster in front of you, you've got a screen in the middle of the dash, and then you've got a row of switches. So the dial for your driving modes, we'll talk about those more in a minute, the buttons for the gearbox, the electric window controls, volume for the stereo, tucked way back here, no idea why, a single cup holder, and that's about it. The big question though is, does this feel like a £200,000 plus car? And I'm not so sure it does. There are some highlights, don't get me wrong. I particularly like these carbon fibre paddles here, but behind them you've got some quite cheap feeling indicator and wiper stalks, and they could have spent a bit more money on the mode dial down here. There are loads of expensive materials in here. There's Alcantara everywhere, leather on the dash, carbon fibre everywhere, because this car has the £6,500 carbon fibre interior package. But I think I know what's letting the side down, and it's screens. Screens used to be something special, but not these days. Everyone's got it, right down to a Kia Picanto. And I think this is the same screen you get in a Fiat 500. I'm also going to have to deduct marks for the fact that it doesn't have physical controls for the climate control, and it's got a camera instead of a rear view mirror. I just can't seem to get on with these things. The perspective is off and all weird, but having said that, if we didn't have one, I literally wouldn't be able to see anything out the back, so I'm going to live with it. Practicality, we should talk about how usable this supercar is, and there's various little cubbies here. You've got a tray here for your phone, you've got a tiny little storage bin there, the single cup holder that we talked about, a little shelf behind both seats, and then two luggage areas. One in the front, which is 47 litres apparently, but when you look at it, it's so shallow you could barely fit a laptop in there. More useful is the luggage space back there, about 101 litres, but because it's so close to the engine, it does get quite hot. Probably best not to put your Easter eggs back there. What else can I tell you? Oh yeah, how does it drive? Powering the MC20 is a brand new 3-litre twin-turbo V6 called Nettuno, as in Neptune, god of the sea, the one who brandishes a trident. See what they did there? It produces 621 brake horsepower at 7,300 RPM and 538 pounds-feet of torque at 3,000 RPM, and your only choice is an 8-speed twin-clutch auto gearbox. The MC20 weighs 1,500 kilograms, which is about 50 kilograms more than a McLaren 570S. 0 to 62 takes 2.9 seconds, 0 to 124 miles an hour takes 8.8 seconds, and the top speed is 203 miles an hour. About as quick as you could ever want to go. And then there's the price. £190,000 as standard, but a whopping 255 grand as tested, thanks largely to a 34 grand exterior carbon pack that I could happily do without. Okay, so let's start by talking about the engine because it is quite clever. It includes something called pre-chamber combustion, which basically preempts the traditional spark plug for a bigger and more efficient burn. Yeah, Maserati's quite excited about it. It's F1 tech apparently, but it's all about improving fuel efficiency. And I don't know about you, but if I've just bought a brand new supercar, I don't really care about efficiency. I just want an engine that's got a bit of bark and bite and character. And this brand new V6, well, it's not quite what I was expecting. It is fizzy and energetic, but this is an engine that very much wears its turbos on a sleeve. There's a little bit of volume from the exhaust, but really it's dominated by the whooshes and whistles from the turbos and a little chirrup from the wastegate when you lift off. And it's a bit old school in the power delivery as well. There's definitely a slight delay and then you get the boost. I mean, perhaps it's a bit unfair to call it laggy, but look, I'm comparing it to the best in the business, to the modern Ferrari V8 turbos, which have basically completely eliminated lag, and compared to those, this feels a little bit last gen, but don't get me wrong, it is still monstrously fast. Far too fast for me to be able to deploy its full fury on winter tyres on a B road in the UK in January. In fact, there's a little dial in front of me which shows me how much of the throttle I'm deploying at any one moment, and it's just taunting me. 60%, Jack? Is that all you got? Okay, so let's talk about the gearbox. 8-speed twin clutch, and there's not a lot to say really. It does exactly what it should. Upshifts, downshifts are all absolutely spot on. The only thing I would say is that I tend to drive it around, whether it's in town or out on a road like this, in manual mode, because that just gives me a little bit more control to keep the engine on boost, to keep it on the boil, and these paddles are such a tactile pleasure to use that that's just how I prefer to drive this car. And now we must talk about driving modes, because we have the dial down here. There's 5 modes to choose from. You've got wet, GT, sport, race, and hold my beer ESC off mode. Sport dials up the ESC, the throttle response, the gearbox response, the valves and the exhaust, stuff like that. Corsa, probably a bit too much for the road. You want to save that one for the track. ESC off. Yeah, I'm not going to go near that on an icy day like this today. So sport it is. And the best bit is there's a button in the middle of the dial as well, which lets you back off the 3-stage adaptive damper. So you can have the powertrain in peppy sport mode, but the dampers set to soft. And I bet you, if you owned this car, that's pretty much the modes that you would use 90% of the time. And when you do that, the suspension in this car is really supple. It's the biggest surprise actually, because it flows beautifully down the road. The way that you can link corners together is fantastic. It doesn't feel too aggressive. It's not fighting against the road surface. If I was in something like a Ferrari F8 Tributo or a Lamborghini Huracan, it would grind you down on a long journey, but not this thing. This could be a great long distance companion. It's got proper everyday usability. I could spend a lot of time in this. And that might come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, because the last time Maserati deployed the letters MC was on the heroic MC12. That Ferrari Enzo-based monster was designed as a homologation road car to allow the race car to compete in the FIA GT Championship, which it won in 2005 and 2006. So, unsurprisingly, it was a bit of an animal on the road and around the track. And now we must talk about the handling, which is where it gets a little bit bizarre. But we start with some good news. It's based around a carbon fibre tub, unlike Ferrari's mainstream mid-engine models, which stick with aluminium, so it's super stiff. The steering, though, is a little bit weird. It's fast and it's super light. That's nothing new for Italian supercars. They love this over-caffeinated feeling to the steering, but as far as I can tell, it's a little bit light on feel. Now, we may find when we drive the car a whole lot harder at 9/10 that it loads up beautifully, but for now, bit of a question mark, as there is over the brakes. So there's plenty of stopping power. They are Brembo carbon ceramics after all, but the feel is just weird. There's loads and loads of squidge in the pedal before you get to the bite. Overall, the sum of the parts is that it flows down the road beautifully. It treads lightly on the road surface. In that respect, it feels a little bit like a bigger, heavier Alpine A110, which is basically the highest of high praise. Now, we have to take this car on track and go and wreck some tyres in it to get a full picture of its handling, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that it's on a B road like this that might be the car's sweet spot. Bit of a mixed bag then, the MC20. It looks seriously special and handles with a deftness that's mesmerising on the right road, but it's also expensive. For the 250 grand price of this optioned up car here, you could have the equally gorgeous new Ferrari 296 GTB, and that's a fancy plug-in hybrid with 200 horsepower more. Look, I know driving fun is about more than just numbers, but you just know the 296 is going to be completely unhinged, whereas the MC20 is a slightly more laid-back take on the supercar, and that's fine with me, because I like it. It's not perfect, there's definitely jobs for the facelift, but what Maserati is, I'm pleased to say, my instincts were right on this one.